All right, Levi. Happy Friday to you, sir. How are you?
Thanks, Robbie. What's crapping?
Robbie.
Yeah, you never seen Joe Dirt?
Ah, man. Went right over the
Dude,
top. Right over the
one
top.
day, one
Missed
day,
that
I'm gonna
one.
marry that girl
Here we are, back at it, as we always are with our,
with
our
some nonsense.
awkward, nonsensical intros. I'm excited though. I think we've got some good stuff to go through today, and specifically with you, Levi. You've got some, particularly on the fitness side, some mistakes that you have identified kind of from your past, with programming, with some of the things you've tried to accomplish in your own, writing your own workout program. When you graduate from a kinesiology degree and you go out into the brave world and you think you know it all, and it turns out you don't know much. Try to kind of test your way through some of those early programs and things that you've written. So let me kick it over to you. What are some of the mistakes you've made in fitness specifically, and what did you do to solve those?
Yeah, I would say, fitness is very a broad term. It can include nutrition, it can include weight training, and just there's many subcategories even within that. So as we think about what it is to share, I think it's important always to identify some of the problems and then provide some solutions and how I or whoever's sharing that problem was able to overcome that. And so the biggest challenges for me in fitness really revolved around programming, which is one of the reasons why I like it so much. It took a long time to get to the point of being a competent and effective programmer. And one of the beautiful things is about programming is, in general, and we've talked about this, it all works. So what I've learned over the years is one of the most important pieces is making it sustainable. And that's probably where I would start with the first problem in self-programming for me, which was I would program, I'd spend all this time programming a full cycle, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16-week cycles. And I'm like, this thing is going to be legit. And then I started and I never finished them. And like
It's always so exciting in the beginning too. It's like on paper,
man,
it's the best program ever written.
Yeah, you figure out how to create Excel, equations so that you can have all of your weights already laid out. So you put in your 1 rep max and it spreads it out across this spreadsheet and you're so pumped, which is cool. I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of programming for yourself is it gets you, it's intentional and it gets you involved, which is exciting. But there are a lot of shortcomings that come with that. And some of the problems that I had was either programming too many exercises, programming too heavy, or programming too much volume via sets, reps. And so that was probably the biggest issue that I had, was trying to figure out what is the effective dose of exercises, weight, and volume.
And what were you usually programming for the same thing, the same outcome or same goal? Or did it vary?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you mentioned, you get out of a principles of conditioning athletes class and you go, oh, I got this figured out. The book tells me to do 5 reps. I'm going to do 5 reps. No, I might even do 6 because I'm like, I want to do more, And so, yeah, I think I forgot your question already because I'm blacking out here. What did you say?
Training goal. Was it
Training
always
goal?
the same
Yeah.
goal that you were?
I mean, the goal is always to get jacked. I mean, that's always the goal. And it's either, do I want to get strong and jacked at the same time or just jacked? And oddly enough, I never really got jacked, but
and that's kind of I guess where I'm going with that is, was it training for too many goals? Was that kind of the fault of the programming, or was it, hey, this is my singular goal, but I'm trying to do too many things to get there?
Yeah, I think again, what is it, the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you have a little bit of experience and a little bit of knowledge and your perception of understanding is blown through the roof. And then the more you learn and the more time you spend in it, the more you realize you don't actually know. And so there's definitely a lot of that goes on, or that I experienced in terms of training and nutrition. And so again, now I realize that there's many pathways to get there. And I think, yeah, that's one of the biggest issues, is having too many goals. I want to get shredded, jacked, and really strong. Well, those are 3 different categories, right, of training. When we talk about hypertrophy, power, strength, muscular endurance, and so on, it's very specific. There's a very specific way to train to meet those goals. And I think you're right. Yeah, there's a lot of, I'm going to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. And then I have pieces of all this stuff, but it never came together well. And I think it was, again, as you mentioned, just trying to do too much at once for no need, really.
So for the person listening who's trying to put together their own program, maybe they know a little bit about how to program, or even if they don't know and they're trying to put that together, how did you solve that?
I think number one is you have to go through the fire. So you have to program for yourself, and in doing that, and then actually do it, and then you'll find out whether it works or not. And so what that's really speaking to is, number one, getting the practice of programming for yourself, and then also doing it so that you're experiencing, did it work? Did it not work? Why not? And then I think the importance of taking notes is also very valuable there. And just, I mean, it doesn't need to be, you're not writing an essay after each workout, but you could say too light, too heavy, too much volume. It was too difficult, or be fully recovered and ready for this workout, because this one just sucks the life out of you. So taking some notes as you go along. But yeah, step one is actually doing the programming to know whether or not it works. And that will help.
Do you think there's a value in kind of being the guinea pig a little bit?
To.
Is that, yeah.
Yep. It's like anything, right?
Would you say it's the same if it's your program that you've written or someone else's?
Yeah, I think so. And that's actually another solution, is do someone else's training too. A coach needs a coach. So even though you know a lot of this information, I've found some of my best gains following other people's programs. Most gains are from following other people's programs, not mine. Because of some of the other issues that we'll get into, like not programming your weaknesses. Well, if I'm programming myself, I go, do I really want to do burpees? Nah. And so I won't do burpees, but burpees could be a good conditioning tool, especially when you don't have equipment, especially when you're looking for something quick and nasty, you're looking for full body. You add in a 90-degree jump turn to that, and now you're moving through multiple planes. So it's a great tool, but it's one that I don't like to use. And there's many tools in my toolbox that I look at and go, I don't want to use that because I'm not proficient in it. And so I think it's just, you got to experience it, and you got to try it out to know what works and what doesn't.
So you mentioned the idea of just too much volume, too many exercises. Get into more of the detail there of what does it look like to solve that, and how do you choose which exercises? How do you choose your template, or what is it that you went through to actually figure out? Or maybe to start with, like, what was the main problem with your early programming, and what did you fix to get to a point where your programming actually was successful?
Yeah, again, I think the main problem was just too much of everything. It was too many exercises, too much volume, and it was too heavy or way under prescribed in weight. So it was kind of missing at the extremes, and it's really kind of caused me to kind of come to the middle. And that's also, as you alluded to, one of the solutions, which is templating things rather than kind of just throwing it all against the wall. Have a template to follow. Like, know your goal, as you mentioned. So if your goal is hypertrophy, then your sets, reps, and weight should reflect the hypertrophy model of 6 to 12 reps, 3 to 5 sets, 65 to 85% of a 1 rep max. And then you will achieve that. And you could speed up the process or slow it down. And there's some other variables to consider, but find out what your training goal is. Is it to get big? Then you need to be training in this way. You can't do, muscular endurance and expect to get big from that. So, identifying a goal. And then once you have that goal, creating a template for it. Now, for me personally, that I found that's very valuable is whether you're going for muscular endurance, power, strength, speed, whatever, hypertrophy, full body, like a lower body push and pull, an upper body push and pull, both vertically and horizontally. And that's something that I've taken the 7 primal, or the primal movement patterns of Power Athlete, where it's like, lunge, step, hinge, and then your 4 uppers that I refer to as the horizontal push, pull, etc.
Go through this again. Slow us down so that the listener can take a note or something. What are the 7 primal movements?
So some essential movements that our bodies can and should move through. In our lower half, it's going to be a hinge. So this is a squat or a deadlift, a step, which would be a step up, and then a lunge, which is a lunge. So you can also maybe even pare that down more simply into a lower push dominant or a lower pull dominant. Push dominant being a squat. And again, this kind of depends on mechanics and foot position and ankle position and all that stuff. But in general, a front squat is certainly push dominant. It's quad dominant. Okay. Whereas something like a deadlift, an RDL, or a good morning is posterior dominant, right? So we have our lower push in the version of a squat or a lunge, and then a lower pull in the version of a deadlift, RDL, good morning, etc. Glute bridges, weighted glute bridges, etc. So we moving up the chain, we then have a horizontal push, which would be something like a push-up, a bench press, a chest fly, anything where we're pushing the weight away from us. The concentric phase is the weight traveling away from our body. And then conversely, a horizontal pull is where we're pulling ourselves to the apparatus, something like a supine ring row, a body row, a bent row, a seated row. These are all horizontal pulls. And then we would progress to something like a vertical push, a barbell press, a front raise, a lateral raise, anything where the difficult part is pressing overhead. And then we would have the inverse of that, which would be a vertical pull. This is a pull up, a lat pull down, and then varying your grips in that. Something even like a sledgehammer strike, where we're vertically, the hard part is the vertical concentric contraction.
So those are the fundamentals. There's your exercise selection kind of broadly, the big ones that you want to make sure you hit. There's a handful, or there's hundreds or thousands of variations of all of those.
100%. So we're twisting. So then you can combine these primals too, where it's not just in the sagittal plane, flexion and extension.
Right.
You could swing the elbows out, work in the frontal plane. You can combine movements. So maybe, and this is a lot of stuff that I'll do for the tactical population, is starting from a lunge position with the weight down by your side and then pressing up overhead while holding a lunge position or something like that, where you're combining upper and lower movements as well as different planes of motion within some of those movements as well. And this is an opportunity to be creative. And this is where I think you can really get in trouble when you start to deviate from something very simple like a template of these 6 exercises. And the purpose of those 6 exercises is to make sure you're not missing anything. By pushing and pulling in the lower half, pushing and pulling horizontally and vertically in the upper half, you're not going to miss any major joints or muscle groups associated. But
do you think that's go ahead.
In an attempt to be creative, you could then get back into that problem of over prescribing too many exercises that are too exotic that you don't really need. And that was another problem that I identified in my programming, is just trying to make it too sexy and too cool, instead of focusing on the basics, doing the common uncommonly well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Is so many times you see beginning trainers, personal trainers in the gym who've just gotten their certification or just got their degree, and they're doing a combination of 3 different exercises, standing on a Bosu ball, and it's like, you're missing the whole point here. You were supposed to do a lunge, but now you're doing a lunge, twist, push, whatever, or curl. Yep. And at least one of the things I see with something like that is, when you start combining or making sexy exercises, a lot of the time, let's say it's a lunge, right? If you're combining a lunge, I see people do like a lunge and a curl a lot of time. Your lower body is stronger than your upper body, obviously. So whatever weight you're limited to for curling now becomes the limiting factor for your lunge, which is not enough. So rather than getting too fancy, too sexy, stick to the basics. I love do the common uncommonly well. That's beautifully said.
That said,
go back to. Yeah, go.
That said, is like, there is something. So what if you have, so I'm thinking of all this stuff I look through the lens of a firehouse, and it could range from the Taj Mahal, and you can have 5,000 pounds of Rogue Olympic bumper plates with Alenko bars, and you got it all. And then you have other stations that have a broom closet is their weight room, and it's one barbell with like 1 10-pound, but 2 25s, and then 2 35s and 1 45. And you're kind of like, wow, what do we do here? So looking through the lens of, for example, if you only have 35s and the limiting factor for your lower half is going to be the weight. But if you combine primals by doing max rep lunges with that lighter weight, you can blow yourself up, or you can hold isometrically for 10 seconds and then perform 10 dynamic lunges. Hold 10 seconds, 10 dynamic lunges for as many bouts of that as you can, and then max out with your curls. Not to say that that's what we should do, but we do also have to take into consideration, how can we be creative with limited equipment and availability of some of that stuff. So again, it's such a hard problem to solve, which is why you have to make the mistakes in order to get to a point of proficient programming.
testing it out. I think that's definitely, I mean, that's part of how we learn what works and what doesn't for us, but also for clients if we're working with people. You mentioned the idea of a template. Where do you find the template? Where did you start with?
It was from all that practice. I'm like, okay, every time I program, or every program that I see from someone else, or every book that I read, what are the big picture themes here? And then what really put that together for me, again, I'll always give them credit, is Power Athlete. Jay Welly, Luke Summers, Tex, and Callie. I mean, they just put all of the book knowledge together in an applicable package, which is those 3 lower body primals, step, lunge, hinge, and then the 4 upper body primals. And again, if you hit those, you're hitting multiple planes, you're hitting all the major joint and muscle groups. So, and then from there, it's going, okay, what movements fall within these? And then it's kind of trying, and then at that point, it's just plugging and playing. That's where you can be creative. So I would focus on the movements, I would focus on the movement or movement pattern rather than the exercises. So for me personally, it doesn't so much matter if you're doing a back squat, front squat, overhead squat, Zercher squat, whatever, a bear hug, sandbag squat, whatever. But the point is that you're hip hinging, bilaterally hip hinging. That's kind of the point. So as long as I know that I got that movement pattern in, I'm going to get all the associated musculature. And then by varying it, you're going to get some of those more, maybe the smaller musculature that you might miss if you always do just back squats instead of vary that particular pattern.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like if the problem was I'm doing too much, it's just too much, right? Whether that be exercise selection, picking too many exercises, or picking competing goals, simplify, right? That seems to be step number 1, is simplify. Step number 2, I guess, where that leads me as far as the next question is, and you address this, like you got information from books, from testing out other programs. Is there like one resource or one place to start for finding, like, once I have my exercises, I'm going to start simple. I'm going to make sure I'm hitting my, horizontal push, horizontal pull, a hip hinge, and, and a squat pattern. What is the programming then? What is that, as far as keeping it simple as well? Like, what are you starting with for the actual writing of the program to achieve whatever the goal is that you have? Where do you find that information?
How many days are we training? Like, it starts the question asking process. Because we can't assume that there is not a one size fits all training model. So we got to start asking the questions of, how many days a week do you plan on working out? What kind of injuries do you have? Are there any movements that you would avoid, and why? And so, like, you can answer the question that you're asking, but there's a lot of other questions that need to be asked as well. And that's step 1. In any kinesiology program, you're going to learn the value or the purpose of a needs analysis. And you're trying to figure out who your client is, or in this case, know thyself. So for me, it's, I know that I need to work through these movement patterns. And so I know I'm going to train 3 days a week. So I would like to hit each movement pattern at least twice a week. So for me, I would do, like, on Monday, it would be a lower push, an upper push, and an upper pull. Wednesday, a lower pull, an upper push, and an upper pull in a different horizontal or vertical plane, whatever I didn't do on Monday. And then Friday, I might do a combination of all of them. So then I'm hitting all of those pieces. So again, it just kind of, I hate to not answer the question, but it is a bit ambiguous in the sense that if you have very specific, like, how many exercises should I select? And I know how many days a week you're training and all that, we can get a lot more specific. So, but in general, I would say first step is needs analysis and figure out how many days a week are you training and what is your goal? And then we can go from there. But regardless, all those movement patterns still need to be in there. And I like to do them twice a week, regardless of whether you're training twice or 4 times
I'm the
a week.
same. I think, hitting everything twice a week is what I've found works well.
And that helps us get to our 10 sets too.
Yeah. Volume,
by training them twice a week. Right.
Yeah. How do you know if it's working, and how often are you testing to see if something is working?
If I continue doing it, and like, I know this sounds dumb, but if I'm still doing it, then it's working because I'm still stinking doing it. You know what I mean? Where it's like, like, there's been times where I've done squat programs, for example, or Olympic lifting programs. They work. I got stronger, but man, after 4 weeks, I was blown out. I was just, my knees hurt, my back hurts, my body hurts, and then I inevitably don't do it anymore. And so I think another thing that people need to realize, and this not to go on a tangent here, is that some of these high level programs, they're specifically written for people on drugs. And I don't think people really realize that is like Smolov is not meant for just Joe Maluk who works the desk job. Like that's not meant for you. That's meant for a Bulgarian that's looking to squat, 800 pounds so that when they go to clean and jerk 600 pounds, it's easy. Like, you know what I mean? So we have to also understand like who some of these programs are built for, especially when they're kind of these like one-offs, like
exotic.
Yeah,
advanced,
exactly. Yeah. And they're super cool and fun to attempt, but hey man, this is not for everyone.
All right. So okay, I like the idea of if it's working, I'm going to keep doing it. If it's not working, I'm not going to keep doing it. But the pushback I have on that is like, what about the person with training ADD, where it's like, ooh, this program, ooh, that program, and they're not putting it, they're not doing the common uncommonly well for months and years. I mean, the best training program I did was the one I followed for
Correct.
2 years, and it was like, yes, there was a degree of like, hey, I saw this was working early on, so I kept doing it. But there's also that piece of like, sometimes you just got to do the work, right?
And that's at the
how do you differentiate? How do you know the difference between if it's working versus like, I just want to do something
well,
different?
if you're getting stronger, like if the weight's feeling easier, because a lot of programs, there'll be either small linear progressions where we're doing a little bit more the next day than we did the day before, or we're working percentages. And so if you're able to continue climbing in your linear progression, it's working. And if you're able to handle percentages easier that were a little bit harder prior to. So for example, let's say we're doing, 5 sets of doubles at 93% of a 1RM, which percentages just blow my mind. But anyways, let's say we're doing six doubles at 95%. Okay. And then 2 weeks later, we're doing 6 doubles at 95% of our original 1 rep max again. And it feels easier, or I don't feel like I'm going to die, or I was able to recover faster, either in the workout or post workout, then I know it's working. But like you said,
for those uninitiated, a double is a 2 rep set.
Sorry. Yes.
So
again, I mean, it's like, for me, a better indicator of whether or not it's working though, is if I'm still doing it. That's ultimately the best. And for those that have training ADD, we're now not talking about programming anymore. We're talking about the psychological piece. And so I think it's a very valid thing to bring up, but we're now talking about 2 different things.
That's a great point. I think for me, just to, since you asked, here's my 2 cents.
Please share the answer to the question I did not ask. No.
I like doing that, asking you a question and giving you my answer.
By the way.
Oh, geez. And now I'm forgetting what I was going to say. No, it was, son of a gun. What was I going to say?
It's the chicken in the background cock-a-doodle doing.
Yeah, I'm hearing your rooster. I'm hearing the rooster back there. Thanks,
my neighbor's got to love me. He
off.
was popping off at 4 this
morning.
What
were we talking about?
We're talking about the psychological piece of.
Or what question did I ask you?
You asked me, how do you know if the training's
working?
This is
really good.
And then it was like whether we're doing it or whatever.
The best podcast ever. So what are the indicators that you use, right? That's one of the things that for me was always helpful is am I getting closer to my goal, right? It's kind of very similar to what you're saying is if it's working, I'm going to keep doing it. But I also want to make sure I have an indicator of some kind, i.e., am I getting stronger? What are those indicators that you're looking at, or is it just goal dependent?
This is a tough one. This one actually is kind of like a vulnerable question, because if my buddy Tex listens to this, who we've had on before, he might slap me around a little bit. Because when we go into, weight rooms, a lot of times people's success, a strength coach's success, is based on whether or not their athletes are getting way stronger. They don't say, hey, has there been less injury? Or, hey, have they been performing better at practice? Or, hey, have they been winning games? The strength coach's job on paper is to get people stronger. So I think that's a very narrow view, or a very narrow way to evaluate whether a program is working or not, which is why for me, again,
I would hope they're asking how they're playing.
But I think from a strength coach's perspective, when they're evaluated, they're not like, well, the 5 teams I coached won, because they would go, well, that's their coach, which certainly is a piece of it. But hey, I kept you healthy. I got you in shape enough to be ready for the game. Like, so they have a role in it too. So again, it's kind of a vulnerable or loaded question in terms of How do you know it's effective? Yes, I think if your strength is going up. So test, retest your 1RM. Test, retest the speed in which the bar moves. There are a multitude of apps out there. You don't need to get a Tendo unit anymore. There's apps that can measure bar speed. There's collars that will measure bar speed. There's, again, maybe just a pre and post general fitness test that you would put yourself through if your goal isn't necessarily strength. It's just general health or muscular endurance. So there's a multitude of, I think maybe the easiest way would be a test retest, but I wouldn't look at just the numbers. I'd also look at the adherence, how your body's feeling. Like, are you waking up feeling beat up? I don't know if that program's working. It's one thing if it's the first couple of weeks and you're kind of adapting to it. But if you're, 6 weeks into a program and you're like, peeling yourself out of bed, I don't know. But that could also be your issues with recovery, which is another fitness issue that I've had in the past. So I don't know if that's a segue or not away from programming.
Well, that's a perfect segue. Yeah, I was going to say I think we've addressed some of the programming common problems and things at least you figured out how to solve. So what's next? Is recovery the next?
Yeah,
the next
one thing I will before we move on is to for programming. One thing that helped me was allowing myself some ranges. I want to hit 8 to 10, or I want to hit 3 to 6 sets, and then it allowed me based on the day to either be very successful and get after it, or hey, I moved the dirt today, I got enough done. Like, have a minimum expectation and have like an ideal and then a realistic. Ideal would be, hey man, I'm feeling great, I'm doing 6 sets at 12 today. But then also be realistic and know that if I get 3 sets of 8, I'm still getting the same amount of work and falling within that hypertrophy model. Moving on to another issue, which is recovery. Sometimes I would blame the programming for my soreness or my struggles, but I also realized looking back that a lot of it was recovery. I wasn't putting the remote controller down at night. I wasn't putting the phone down. I wasn't closing the laptop. And sleep, I mean, is just such low-hanging fruit that I don't even know if it needs qualification at this point in 2022 of the value of sleep, but get your stinking sleep. That's like probably the best recovery for me. And then nutrition is a close second, if not like a competing recovery piece. But that again was a challenge is, I was blaming it on the programming, but it was because I was eating like trash and not sleeping and saying, the training was hard. Well, if I would have treated myself better, then I might've been able to survive that better, I guess.
So recovery issues. What do you see when you're not recovering well? What does that look like for you?
Going to bed later. If I'm in bed after 10, I am intentionally not recovering. Like, I know exactly what I'm doing to myself. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, let me rephrase. So I mean, like, what symptoms do you notice if you're quote unquote not recovering? Are you more sore? Are you lethargic, mental fatigue? Like, what is that? How does that manifest?
Yeah, I feel like at this point in the game, I could feel the difference between soreness and achiness. When I'm sore, I feel like I've gotten a good training session. When I'm achy, I have not recovered. And I guess to try to quantify that is, like, if I'm squeezing my biceps, or like say I did arms and I'm kind of squeezing my biceps, or I'm extending my arms and feeling my triceps, there's kind of like a tingle or kind of like a burn, or like you kind of feel it there. That's a soreness to me. An achiness is, oh man, you're like walking up the steps and it's not your muscles, it's like your joints that are sore. So I guess maybe that would be how I'd quantify it. Soreness is more of a muscle, whereas achiness is kind of bone and joint. And I know, I know if I'm not recovered, more so by the achiness rather than the soreness.
What are some of the, I mean, for me, so you mentioned sleep. That's always been the hardest factor for me to, overcome willpower, right? I'm still to this day terrible at going to bed on time. That's one of the things that I always struggled with. Stay up too late. And so how would you help me with that, right? What are some of the tools or tactics, or how did you fix that? What was it, just willpower, or did you find some specific things that actually helped you?
I think it's cute
more?
that you assume that I fixed these things. Number one, it is. I mean, I know that we're not supposed to do it based on willpower, but dang it, man, it is willpower. Like, you got to make that decision. Like, That's in your control. That is something that's absolutely in your control. So because it's in your control,
how would James Clear approach that?
So go read his book. Go read James Clear's book. Number one.
No. Go listen to our podcast on
then you don't
Atomic
have to
Habits.
read it. You could just listen to that and you'll get the pieces out of it. But yeah,
Save
I
you
think
some
it's, you know, like you said, setting the goal and then doing small things that are building you towards that goal. As you have proficiency and consistency in one small thing, then, you know, then you can start stacking those things over time. I think that's probably the most effective one for me, is trying something small and simple. I know I should probably go to bed closer to 9 o'clock than 10 o'clock. But when you're used to going to bed at 11 o'clock, going to bed at 9 is way harder than going to bed at 10. So a small compromise for me was just be in your bed at 10. Just be in it. You can be on your phone. You can be on your laptop. We don't have a TV in our room. And I never take my laptop in my room. So the only thing it would be potentially my phone, but just be in bed by 10. Do whatever you want, but just be there. And so that was step one. Then it was, hey man, now let the phone go a half hour before you go to sleep. And so again, you're kind of stacking these things. But so for sleep, I would say, when you wake up and you're feeling just real juicy, what did you do the night before? Did you not eat past 7 o'clock? Did you turn the TV off a half hour earlier or an hour earlier or whatever? Start to take those notes and find out, and then just be real with yourself. I need to do this to get this. And if you don't start doing those things, then maybe you're not ready for it. And you're not an evil person for that, but just don't expect anything different.
Yeah. I think for me, and again, I'm interjecting, so apologies.
Please, because I'm
I
talking
hear
too
myself
much
talk
here.
apparently. So. I kind of, as I think through, I mentioned the James Clear Atomic Habits book kind of jokingly, but also because I think it works, identifying ways to kind of eliminate just relying on willpower. Mm-hmm. Because for a lot of people, and myself included, willpower is not enough in many cases. I'll use the sleep example of, a lot of times I find that my willpower is just not enough. There's a show that I'm really hooked on right now, and I want to watch more of that. And another half hour or an hour is not going to kill me tomorrow. But you do that over and over, and sure enough, you're not getting your results.
So it is willpower. Let's real quick.
Me,
it is willpower. There has to be some level of willpower, but we don't want to make it only that. Is that kind of what we're drilling down on there for a second?
Yeah. At some level, it's always going to be a decision. Mm-hmm. But I think the more you can take that decision out of your hands or build in ways to make that decision easier and less all on you, the better it will be, or more successful you'll be at that. So that was one of the biggest things I took away from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, was what are the things you can do to make that willpower less of the only thing blocking you from success or failure, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, I would say this is the two-step process. The very general answer to the specific question is identify what is the hurdle, what is keeping you from success, and then identify a fix to that. So for me, the hurdle is watching a show later at night, right? A fix would be for me, the fix that I know would actually work is taking that completely out of my hands, signing up for something like there's a I think it's a browser mm-hmm. add-on called mm-hmm. Cold Turkey. And it basically just shuts off. You cannot access the internet on your computer, if that's what I'm using, mm-hmm. once this is turned on. So I've made the decision, in a moment of clarity, I'm going to go sign up for Cold Turkey. I'm going to eliminate that option. So I can't do it. That way I know at 10:30 at night or whatever time, my internet's off. It's not something I even control day to day, right? Because if I can control it, I'm going to say, it's Friday. I'm going to stay up a little later. I'm going to watch the show. Versus if it's
here's my pushback to that, though, is that you still have to have a tremendous amount of willpower to not just go, I'll just go turn that off real quick.
Well, that app, you can make it very difficult to actually reinstate your internet or whatever. You can make it pretty darn hard.
Agreed.
You're taking 5, 6, 7 steps
for sure. But you could also then just go, well, screw this app. I'll just have willpower. But so I agree with you.
Right.
Yes, it does. It does. It's kind of man, but here's a problem that I found with that personally is that when I've set some of those boundaries and then I break them, man, I could get into a negative tailspin because I go, hey, I've put all these roadblocks up and I'm still crushing through these roadblocks that should deter me from doing this thing I don't want. And it's well, dude, what a silly guy. What a silly guy.
That's not what you actually tell yourself.
I use more
You're
choice
silly.
language in my self-talk for sure. Anyway, sorry for derailing you there.
I agree though. I think that's a whole, we can get into that. That's a tangent for sure in terms of like what happens then when you as soon as you break that, then it starts getting ugly. But I think there is value in that. Make it a higher hurdle to clear, make it as hard as possible for you to break that rule or whatever it is. If it's really important to you to see success. If you find yourself breaking those over and over, maybe it's time to ask, is that really a goal that I want? Maybe not. And that's okay too. It's just have that conversation or have that self-reflection to figure that out. So anyway, tangent over. Anything else? So recovery, programming, what else have you found problem-wise in the fitness realm?
Yeah, we touched on the other two, and one of them for sure goes with programming, which is avoiding my programming my weak spots. I joked about burpees. I hate burpees. There's a handful of movements that I just go, nope, don't want any part of them. And some of them, again, because we're training the movement pattern rather than the movement, you can avoid that. Like, you don't have to do a burpee to get conditioned, to get a horizontal push, to get a vertical jump. Like, you don't have to do a burpee. You can chunk that out. So, but I do think that I avoid it because I don't like it more so than because my body can't handle it. So it's kind of making sure that you're honest with yourself of, am I not programming this because I don't like it, or am I not programming this because it's not suitable for my body? And those are kind of two different things.
Right.
And then in addition to that, when I talk about avoiding maybe the larger movement, well, we can chunk that out. And that ties in for two things. Number one, for skill acquisition. And then number two, making sure that we are mastering the basics, going back to doing the common uncommonly well. And that was another oversight of mine, or a problem, is I was like, oh, I want to do an Olympic lifting protocol, so I'm just going to jump into this protocol, but it's assuming that you've had 12 years of Olympic lifting training or experience. Well, I didn't, and I still did the program. And my movements suffered for that, really. So not programming weaknesses is a problem, and also not mastering movement before kind of progressing to something else. As far as the not programming weaknesses, a couple ways to solve that problem is to have a colleague. So I would have you program for me. I'd say, hey, here's a template I'm following here, and here are some example movements. Go beyond these movements, but here's some examples that fall within this template. Can you program some exercises for me? Or you follow someone else's program. You go and do a program that you know that you're like, this is going to be like muscular endurance, and I want to be muscular strength. Or you shouldn't cross your goals, but if that's the gap in your training, then field it out to someone else. That was kind of my way of approaching that.
The mastering the basics thing, I'm trying to kind of think through that. Like, what are the basics? You mentioned the primal movements. Like, do we need to go beyond that, or is it like, hey, get really good at these first before, like, for years before you even need?
I think you would get really good at the primals, and then you can combine primals, and that's how you can start to challenge the things. But you're still doing your primals. Like, I don't know if you have to do, like, the only way. Power cleans or Olympic lifts are not the only way to develop violent ankle, knee, and hip extension. There are many other ways to do that. So I don't think, as far as mastering the basics, I mean, so I did a lifting seminar this summer, and there was desire to do the full clean, the full snatch, and all these things. And I'm totally down for all that. But then I asked the question, I said, who are we teaching this to? And then who are they teaching it to? Does the common person really need to be proficient at a full clean and a full snatch? Absolutely not. Can they? Sure. Can they desire that? Of course. But like, that's not a default exercise to me that everyone must know. But in each of those, there is a deadlift component to that. There is a squatting component to that. And lo and behold, that's our lower push and pull. So we can chunk out and do deadlifts and squats and still gain the same benefit as we would with that, globally, of course. Just move the bar faster. Keep the weight a little bit lighter and move faster, and you're driving that same adaptation. Is it the exact same? Of course not. But does a Does my 68-year-old dad need to do cleans? No. But should he squat and pull? Some version for sure. So I think that was the solution to mastering, to the problem being not mastering the basics and advancing too quickly. The solution to that is chunking out the complex movement into and bringing it back to some of those common movement patterns and getting volume from that. And then after a year, 2 years, some legitimate amount of training, then you can start doing some of the exotic stuff.
Yeah. I feel like one of the undertones that I keep hearing or that keeps popping into my head is the basics, man. Just do the like it's so tempting, especially for, I think, people in our field or people who have spent time studying and learning, kinesiology or exercise science. You want to get into all the fancy stuff because that's fun. It's like, that's interesting stuff. The reality of it and what we've learned after, 20 years of training or 15 years of training or whatever it is, yeah, that's fun. But the basics are what work. Like, that's the reason those are the basics is because they work. And sometimes people don't want to hear that, but at the end of the day, like doing the uncommonly well.
Is that a verbiage issue where it's, instead of saying doing the basics, doing the fundamentals? Is fundamentals a less threatening word to the ego? Like, what word could be used to reinforce the value of the fundamentals without going, well, dude, I've been training for 5 years. Doesn't look like it. Doesn't look like it. And not from I know people that they're jacked. It looks like they've been training their whole lives, and maybe some of them have, but their movement quality is trash. I mean, they're still just, half repping it, but not half repping it for the challenge of half repping it, but because they don't know any different. You know what I mean? But they're jacked. Like they look like they know exactly what they're doing. And I think that's, a lot of people were kind of the charlatans that are, oh yeah, do all this stuff. And then you kind of watch a move and you go, oh, okay. All right. So
I feel like I've seen a few of those people on social media before where they look really good, but they don't know what they're doing.
So what about you?
I mean, that's the unfortunate reality though, is just because you look a certain way doesn't mean you will A, look that way forever, and B, like doesn't mean you know exactly what you're doing, and vice versa, right? Just because we've studied something doesn't mean that we know exactly what we're talking about either.
100%. So, yeah,
don't listen to anybody. Figure it out yourself.
No what about you, man? What's a couple fitness things or one major fitness thing that was a problem for you that you solved?
Yeah, I'm gonna get that. The thing you said, trust no one. I've actually heard this from several people in the last 2 weeks. Was trust but verify as an approach to a lot of different things, actually. And I would throw that in as a kind of a last piece of whatever to throw on top of. It's the cherry on top of any of those issues that you identified. Is so much of it comes down to test it out, find out for yourself. Does this work? Take what works, discard the rest. So. As far as my end on the fitness side, I was thinking as I was kind of thinking through this episode idea and kind of the stuff we're getting into, I was trying to think through like what are some of the problems I've helped other people solve, and I really just came back to what was the main problem I solved for me, and that's where I'm going with this. And for me, like as I sit here, and for those of you who are watching, if you're watching this on YouTube or whatever. My natural genetics. You look at my parents. You look at anybody in my immediate family. We are very lean people, right? And the trouble with this is, I feel like a lot of people will not identify with my struggle, but I know there are some out there. So for those of you who struggle to put on mass, that was always the thing that was the issue for me that I was trying to fix. The problem or the pain that I had that I was trying to fix was how do I put on mass? I'm trying to build muscle. And man, my genetics do not want me to build muscle. And that was something I tried to fix for years and years and years. And finally, I mean, let's see, I started lifting in 2003, 2004. Like that was my sophomore year of college. That was really when I started lifting seriously. I'd kind of toyed around with it a little bit, but seriously lifting and kind of trying to figure it out. 2003, 2004. It wasn't until 2013 that I actually figured this out. So it makes me sound real dumb that it took me 10 years to to figure this out. When the solution was so simple, right? It was And what I'm getting to is the solution was a basic. It was a fundamental that it took me so long to kind of, I was trying all these other things. I tried creatine. I tried this magic, workout. Westside Barbell for Skinny Bastards was one of the ones. Like all these training programs that I was like, that's the one. That's going to fix it for me. And in reality, the solution, and if you're not in this boat, you could flip this probably pretty easily and do the opposite if you're trying to lose weight or lose body fat, if that's the issue. But for me, it came down to, and this is going to sound so ridiculously simple, eat more food, you dummy. Like I was doing the training, right? I was training hard for all those years, right? I was lifting hard, and it wasn't an effort. And I see this a lot with, hard gainers, right? That's a term that gets thrown around in the old, bodybuilding forums and things for people who are in this category of lean. Your body, your genetics are more lean. It's harder to put on mass, harder to gain size, hard gainer. And I've actually seen some interesting research about that group, the people who are leaner and don't put on mass as easily. It takes even more calories. Like basically you eat more and your metabolic rate keeps going up is the trend. And I'm seeing some interesting stuff on the obesity research side where it's like you have a very, very different kind of internal system going on where it's like the people who fall into the obese category, it's so much harder to get the result. Even if they're cutting calories, the metabolic rate slows down no matter what. So you keep cutting calories, your metabolic rate keeps slowing down. I'm not an expert in that field, so that's basically my understanding on that side of it versus the opposite. What I was experiencing was I would eat more, but my metabolic rate would just speed up and I wouldn't gain weight. And so basically the solution was I had to get really uncomfortable. I had to eat a lot of food. And I mean, like it got to the point where I didn't like eating because it was a chore, basically. It was like, and I think this holds true regardless of if you're trying to gain weight or lose weight, because most of us typically want what we don't have. That certainly was the case for me. And so it was like, man, I had to get really uncomfortable. And I'm grateful that I've never had to struggle going the other way of getting lean, but I would imagine it's very similar. You have to get uncomfortable. And I mean, what a tough problem to have of eating a lot of pancakes and a lot of macaroni and cheese. Right. But I mean, it was uncomfortable. I will say it was uncomfortable to have to do that. So I was nailing the training. I had to add a little bit more volume. So how did I solve this problem of gaining mass after 10 years of not gaining mass? Some of it probably had to do with age and getting to a training age where I kind of knew how my body responded. But adding a little bit more volume. So earlier you talked about the importance of 10 working sets per week was kind of the minimum. That's, at least from a research standpoint, that is the minimum threshold. If you're trying to build muscle, that research says, hey, you need at least 10 sets per muscle per week. So getting to a point where volume was actually there or beyond, adding things like drop sets and actually like really hitting the muscles pretty hard. But then to your point of recovering, making sure sleep was there. And again, that was the one that always, looking back, that was probably a hindrance to me that I didn't address at the time well enough, was sleep. This was all through graduate school and things like that. So of course I was staying up late and writing papers and, not doing what I should have done with sleep. But the training and the nutrition were the two pieces that I will say I kind of figured out. And so again, it was just a matter of being uncomfortable and understanding that in order to actually, if I say this goal is what I actually want, and I think, well, without getting into specifics, the heaviest I ever got was 190. My natural kind of set point is about 175. If I don't train, it drops down to like 165. But getting up to 190 and being still pretty lean, right? Still having abs, but getting to that point where I was like, okay, I've built some mass and I'm proud of that. Like it took years to get there. It took uncomfortability, but it was a combination of training volume and then just a lot of calories. And so that was what kind of solved it for me. And specifically, like in addition to that, I would say it was a combination of that and having the self-discipline to ignore all the fluff that I thought was exciting, right? All the supplements that really didn't do anything for me. All the sexy programs that really didn't do anything for me. It was the basics, right? Eat more calories, hit the big stuff, right? The boring stuff. That's where you get the biggest return. So volume, calories, sleep. Those are
curiosity. How long
boring,
did it take you to, how long, when you got up to 190, how long did it take you to drop back down to kind of your more homeostatic weight of 175 to 180 Like, did that drop pretty quickly when you were done with all the massive eating, or were you able to keep some of that on for a while?
The trouble, right? The trouble with getting to that point was I realized
it was harder to eat than it was the training.
Right? Like it was very much.
People don't realize that it's the eating that's the hard part, not the training. Yeah.
Well, just the maintenance of that, right? Like it was easier to maintain than it was to get there, right? That's always the case. Like maintenance is easier than like climbing the mountain. But I didn't feel good. I didn't move well. I felt like I was bloated and stiff, and just like I didn't like that. I was like, okay, I reached the goal. And found out I didn't really want to be there. And so it was a pretty quick, like, okay, this is not the training style I want to do forever, because it was, a lot of volume and a lot of work, and took some serious effort to eat and sleep to recover from that. So it was more about longevity for me. So to answer the question, I think, so that was over that kind of took place over probably 9 to 12 months or so, when I actually like figured that out and made those changes. And I would say within 6 months, I was back down to kind of 175, 180, feeling better, moving better, still looking decent, but just not as big. And I was like, okay, I got there. I was proud of the accomplishment, and it was fun to solve that problem finally after so many years. And it was a valuable lesson. I think the most important part was it was a valuable lesson in learning the importance of the basics, because that's something I can apply to whatever. It's exactly what you were talking about of do the common uncommonly well. It took me way too long in hindsight to figure that out, but that's the kind of the point of why I wanted to share that, was because I know other people do the same thing. And so that's what it was for me, was figuring out what I needed to do, and then just do that again and again and again. And whether you like where you get to or not, like I said, for me, I didn't really want to stay there, but there was a big value in learning
and I
the
think
steps needed to get there.
What stands out the most that maybe is an undertone that we're both stating is you got to take notes, and you got to evaluate, and you got to kind of you got to track this stuff. It's not just going to fall into place. Like there is any person worth their salt has had a training journal at some point. If not still to this day. I mean, that's something that I used to have and would carry around like a Bible man. Like that was on my hip. I was excited to ride in the training and what weights I hit and all that stuff. And it fell off over the years because I didn't have the same kind of vigor or direction in my training or a specific goal per se. But I've started charting that stuff again because I'm doing some testing for some firefighter programming and realizing the value of it, of just it gets you excited again, but also you get to look back and go, have I actually been pushing it the way I think that I've been pushing it? Have I been as consistent as I thought I was going to be? And having a journal really helps determine whether or not, like that is, it's kind of like the video never lies. That's kind of that version. If you're looking back at your journals, it doesn't lie. Like that is, you either did that training or you didn't. And it's either working or it isn't. And you get to a snapshot into what you were doing to see what was effective and what wasn't.
Yeah, I think the sub theme I'm hearing is kind of reflecting back, like look at the evidence. Does the evidence support what you say is your goal? If not, something needs to change. If it is working, then keep doing the basics, keep hitting those same things. So it doesn't work anymore.
Because if you're saying that you want to get big and strong and jacked, and you're doing sets of 12 on your compound lifts or sets of 15 on your compound lifts, you ain't gonna get there because the weight ain't heavy enough. So at least according to the numbers. Some people might respond well to that, but very few will gain mass on, 5 sets of 15 at whatever that's going to be, 60% or 50%. Like it's just not going to happen. So.
Yeah. Good stuff. Anything else? Any other problems that you feel like you've
no,
really solved
but
in the fitness
if
realm?
you guys have problems, if there's something that's sticking or you're kind of like, man, I've been pounding my head against a wall trying to figure this thing out, reach out to us. We're more than happy to at least problem solve with you. If we don't have the answer immediately, then we'd love to dig into that stuff with you. Cause this is what we do. This is what we spent our life doing. And we're more than happy always to share that information with you guys. And because selfishly, it allows us to learn as well, especially if it's something that we haven't come across before. So reach out and be more than happy to tackle some of those problems with you guys.
Beautiful. Well said. Well, thanks.